anonymity, right? So, till now, whatever we have learned is all about security. Okay. And now we are moving from security to privacy. We will see there is a very subtle difference between these two, and they are totally different. And but the difference is, like, for a naive user, it seems like both are, one and the same thing, or maybe much more related things. So in this particular unit, we will look deeper into what privacy means. Okay. Moreover, we will also see how anonymity is related to privacy, because there is, a notion that anonymizing means you are actually maintaining your privacy. Okay. First, let's see duality of privacy and security. So security is all about keeping unwanted traffic from entering one's network, if we talk in networking terms. Okay. So if we want to secure our system, we don't want any unauthorized user to enter into the system, any unwanted entities to, tamper our system or something like that. So this is what security is. We are protecting our system from some unauthorized entities or adversaries to enter into the system. Okay. So if they cannot enter into the system, they cannot break the confidentiality, they cannot made any modification and things like that, right? Whereas privacy is about keeping wanted information from leaving one's network. Can you see the difference? If we want privacy, we want that this particular information should not go out of these boundaries. Okay. So this is privacy. And security means we are somehow protecting unauthorized entity to enter into the system. Are you see the point? Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So basically, this is what in general we want to do. This is what is the notion we have. Okay. Now there are few questions. Is this always true? Like, can we define privacy like just like that? Okay, that we have to keep the wanted information or sensitive information from leaving our network. Okay, so this is actually true. This is a truth. But so I think one of you has said that this is related with confidentiality, right? Privacy is related with confidentiality, means you want to keep the things little to yourself, little secret. Okay, don't want it to go to somewhere else, right? Now the question is it too simplistic? So we are actually concerned about the privacy. So can we define privacy in that simple words? Can we define that privacy is nothing but the confidentiality? Okay. So this we will going to look into this particular unit. Now the problem is, when we say that our data should not go out of a particular network, okay, how we can relate this particular thing with the security? Because in security also we can define one of the goal of security is confidentiality, right? So we can say that this is also a security with, I mean, only confidentiality part has been, taken care of, then it is called privacy. Okay. So it is not actually that simple. We cannot just say one line that and can define privacy. Whereas security we can define very well, right? So let's see, how this varies actually. Now the problem with privacy is privacy requirements vary across user. So for example, suppose, so we are saying that, privacy is about keeping wanted information from leaving the network. Now you have to define what is the wanted information, and this differs from person to person. Like for someone, maybe the photograph is not that much private, they used to post their photographs over the social networking site, and even if somebody will take their photograph, they don't mind. But for some people, for some users, it is a private data, it is a sensitive data. They don't want their photo to be, out in the public network somewhere. And this is what, make the things little complex, because this is quite subjective. Privacy is very subjective. It depends upon the requirement of the user. Okay, so the variation comes in privacy due to the different users have their different requirements, and according to that you have to define privacy with respect to their requirements, right? Whereas if you talk about security, the market is entirely different. We have well defined goals of security, right? So till now we have defined security as confidentiality, integrity, we have availability, we have non repudiation, and many other terms like that. Okay, and each and every person will understand security in that sense. So if you want security, the rules are same. If I want security, the rules are same, right? But this is not actually true with privacy. Okay, so and therefore, security. So if we say security attacks lead to disconnection from internet, file and other damage, loss, tangible attacks. So we have a well defined, definitions that when the security breach was there. But if we talk about privacy breach, you are not very sure that whether it is a privacy breach or not. Okay, why? Because of the variation in this in the requirement of each and every user. Okay, so privacy damage is not viewed in the same way for reasons that are not always clear. Okay, we don't know whether if the image is public, we don't know whether the person himself put the image, or the image was there with his consent, or it is leaked or what. So we don't know about it. Okay, and that is why it is quite difficult. So if we talk about security, it is a well studied and well understood field. Adversary model is much better known. We have attack trees model, and we have seen many other ways in which a person can have analyze the risk which is associated with the security. But this is not actually true with privacy. Okay, in security, attackers have been classified into clear categories. Okay, threats are classified into proper categories. Attack vectors are broadly understood. Defense mechanism is built over decades. So we have encryption. So if you want confidentiality, just have encryption. If you want integrity, you can have hash, you can have mac. If you want non repudiation, you can have digital signature. So each and every defense mechanism is well studied, well understood, and well established from decades. Okay, we have terms like firewall that are known to many layperson. Like everybody know what is firewall. Even he is not very much aware or related with the security, but they understand what a firewall does. Okay, and it can be defined as I told you, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So security is in that sense a very well defined term, very well understood topic. Okay, we have many online security softwares like firewalls, antivirus softwares, case hardened OS, right? So there are the operating system which are hand coded, like which are specially designed for a particular security purpose. We have secure kernels nowadays, right? So at the hardware level also we have a lot many things. We have barcodes, we have biometric devices, we have CCTV cameras, we have many such things to keep the things secure. At the OS level, we have many kernels which actually designed to provide security. Like security is their main goal, and because of that, definitely there are some usability issues. But anyways, those are used in some customized environment, right? Like for military purposes or something like that. Then we have softwares like firewalls. We have other protection like OTP, password, this, that. I mean, too much is available out there, right? So there are numerous commercial products which are available, and most of them require minimal end user configuration. You just have to start using it, right? You just place it, you just somehow install it and just start using it. Now the question is, why is this important? Why we are discussing so much things? So the why we are discussing this is this field is quite mature, it becomes second nature and more user can benefit from it. Okay, so now it comes into our nature. For example, in the beginning when the pandemic started, nobody would like to wear a mask and use the sanitizer and things like that. But now it is a habit, like it comes into practice. Okay, now whenever you go out, you will first think of, okay, where is my mask? Okay, so this is what happens. So security is now such a mature field that each and every person, no matter whether they are aware of this field or not, they know that you have to keep a strong password, you need to keep a pin, you need to keep this secure and this and that, right? So too much is there, and the important thing is usability is the key. Okay, at the same time when we are providing a security to the user, people try to make it as simple as possible, so to the to make it usable basically, and therefore security products are well used. But the problem of uh, you know this privacy is, if okay, so let's see what happened actually. Okay, but just remember this term usability, because it is quite an important thing. We have learned a lot about usability in security uh, uh, topic also, and we have seen that sometimes it happens. So we have taken an example of Gmail, right? So I mean, no one would like to have encrypted mails every time and then decrypt it, right? It may be possible that some of us would like to have two-way authentication and some of us don't like to have that particular security. Okay, so it is like that. You can plug and play the security mechanism which is out there to maintain the usability according to you. Okay, and even the operating system, browsers, all equipped with this security products. Now, what are the challenges in privacy? Can we see that the solution that we have developed by security is applicable in privacy as well? Okay, if yes, what are those tools, and if not, what are the challenges that are different in privacy? Right, so we will going to look into this particular thing. Now before that, let me tell you a simple example. So first of all, we need to understand what do we mean by privacy, because we have to understand what privacy is, then only we can think of how to have privacy. Okay, now let me give you a simple case study. And this case study, through this case study, what I would like to tell you is, see how complex the situation is. Okay, and we will actually try to see what are the challenges, right? So I'm going to present you a case study. Okay, and then you have to tell me in the end that what are the challenges which are there in the privacy but not there in the security. Okay, right. So for that matter, let me take the example of Android operating system. As you all know, we are processing lots and lots of data on smartphones. It has our private information, sensitive information, confidential information, lots and lots of things we are storing on our mobile phones. Photos, emails, messages, bank account details, passwords, all the shopping details, your preferences, everything is out there on your mobile phone. Okay, now I am taking the example of Android operating system because it is having a high popularity. Okay, so according to a report, 46% of world population who are using smartphones are using Android smartphones. Okay, so approximately, so the people who are using smartphones, I mean approximately 50% of them are using Android, so therefore you will take that example. Now, the problem with smartphone is it has the capability to store all your sensitive data. But along with that, it also have the capability to leak that data outside the device. Okay, so in the beginning, we have learned that we can say that privacy is something we can define privacy as that our sensitive data should not go out of the network. Okay, and unfortunately smartphone has that capability to send that data outside the network because it contain that much data. Okay, so let's see, let's see something about Android. So I don't want to invest more time on explaining you what Android is. I hope you all are aware. So this is a company which is founded by Android Inc. and in 2005 it is taken over by Google. And in 2007 they decided to make it public, open source. Okay, and in 2008 first Android phone was launched. Okay, and since then, I mean, how many years have been passed? Approximately 13 years. And you can see around 50% of the world's population, they have actually covered, right? So it is that popular. Okay, so 74% versus iOS, which is quite old, have 25, around 25%. Okay. Now, the why Android is popular, because it is open source in nature. The mobile phone comes at very affordable prices. The learning curve for the developer is quite easy, and we have a large number of applications over Google Play Store. Millions and millions of applications are there. Even for a developer, also it is very easy to upload their application because the fees is very nominal. Where iOS is costing per app, charges per app, Google is charging only maybe $25 for lifetime, something like that. Okay, so that is the reason why it is popular, and that is the reason why malware writers can also make an account and upload malicious apps. Okay, so according to a report, every 8 second there is one infected Android app which is uploading on the Google Play Market. Okay, so you can think of how malicious devices, or how the malware applications are present out there. Okay, all right. So now let me you know so for the sake of the completeness, let me tell you few points. What is the reason that Android malware is rising with this much speed? Okay, so we have more than 10,000 new malicious apps per day. Okay, per day 10,000 malicious apps. The reason is, there are too many Android versions. If you see right from the beginning, I think now we have Android 12 or maybe 13, I don't know. But we have this many variations in just 13. So every year a new version of Android is coming, approximately. Okay. And most of the devices are outdated. Either the hardware does not support the upgradation, or people don't want to do it because of the data issues or something like that. Right? So now, the problem is most of the devices have older version of Android operating system installed in their devices, and older version have many vulnerabilities. So that is why the attack is quite easy to do. Then we have, the devices are at very affordable prices, and due to that, what people do is they just uh, download Android image, since it is an open source, install some malware into it, and then burn this particular image, this malicious image, into the firmware. Okay, and they will sold the devices at very cheap cost. Okay, maybe 5,000, same features in 5,000, 7,000, 10,000. I mean, like that. So yes, so that is another way. So because of which our private information can be leaked to the attackers, because they have pre-installed malwares into the devices. Okay, and the things which is installed at the boot time are called system apps. Okay, we cannot, as an end user, we cannot uninstall those apps. We don't know what is going on behind the scene. Okay, so this is another reason. And the third reason could be, there is a alternative sources. So if you install an application from Google Play Store, they give you some guarantee that it is vetted by whatever security mechanism they are using. But there are many third party app stores which are providing the same paid app as free app. Okay, and people used to just install the app from that sources. It could be possible that they have inserted some, some code injection, some maliciousness was inserted into the app, and then they are making it available for free. Okay, so because of these issues, people go and install this malicious app and make their device vulnerable. Okay, so the overall say is, the security situation remain tense. Okay, and the reason is because privacy, we cannot define privacy very well. Okay, so now let me give you the scenario, and then you can think of what could happen and how to protect this actually. Okay, so the attack that I'm discussing is collusion attack. What do you mean by collusion attack? This particular attack is a smartphone attack. Specifically, it is, named by Android community, the people who are working in Android security community. So what is collusion? It refers to a scenario when two or more applications interact with each other and they perform malicious tasks. Okay, so you all are aware of, notion of permissions which are there in Android phones. So whenever you want to access some sensitive data, you have to give permission to access that thing to the app. Okay, now if there are high permissions, then definitely the research tools that are developed, yeah, the antiviruses that are developed, yeah, other security mechanism that are developed will give them a flag that since this application is asking for too many permissions, it is not possible to give it. Okay, and therefore just flag this app as malicious app because this many permission is not required. Okay, so Android is following principle of least privilege. Least privilege is given to any app. Okay, so if you are using a photo, I mean, camera app, only camera permission has to be given. No need to have location permission or other type of permission. Okay, if you are using a news app, suppose, you only need internet permission. There is no need to have read contact permission and things like that. Okay, so they adopted this model where they followed a principle of least privilege. Okay, now what do how this collusion attack will work? So basically, what malicious writer then thought that if we put all the permission into one app, it has been detected by some or the other tool, or the application has been flagged to, when it is flagged maybe uh, high risk app or something like that. So what we do, we will divide the permission into two apps. Now, the person who's install these two apps simultaneously, if these two apps are present in one device, then we can perform the leak operation. Okay, so the goal here is to read the contact information of a user and transmit it to the internet. Okay, maybe some CNC server is sitting here. This is the overall goal. But if all the permission, so what you need for doing this act, you need three permissions. You need permission to read the contact, you need permission to write the contact, and you need internet permission. Okay, so these are the three permissions that is required. Now what happen, what adversary will do, they will break this entire functionality into two steps. So one step is reading the contact information. Okay, so read. Second will write, write it somewhere, and then the third one is send it. Read, write, and send this information to maybe CNC server. Okay, so they divided this task into two or three steps. Okay, so for example, if we divide it into two steps, what the first step will do, first step will read the information and write it somewhere, and second app is responsible to send the written information to CNC server. Okay, so they are in the collaboration with each other. It could be possible that one app will read the information, second app will write the information, and third app will send the information. Okay, so this is what happened. Now in this case, contact manager is asking for read and write contact permission. The user may thought that yes, since it has to do something with our contact details. I mean, it is not a malicious app, just give it that permission. If news app is asking for internet permission, we will give that permission, right? Now what this particular apps are doing, contact manager is reading the information, and it will write the information into some, something called intent, which is IPC mechanism, right? So through this intent, we can two apps can communicate with each other. So this is the IPC mechanism in Android. And for intent, there is no permission required, right? Any app can talk with any other app with proper mechanism that is in place, right? So now what contact manager will do, it will read the contact, write the contact, and send it to another app. Now this news app will actually have the internet permission, so it can able to send this information to the CNC server. Okay, so this is the problem. This is called collusion attack. Okay, so now this is one experiment that is done by me. Okay, what I did was, so I did my research in this particular field. So in that, what I did is I just download one app from Google Play Store, and that app is called Device ID app. Okay, and it is very popular app and very simple app. What it will do is, it will tell you what is your MAC address, what is your IP address of the device, what is the serial number of the device. Sometimes you need this serial number and all this information, so the app will just give you that. Okay, when you see the permission list of that particular app, it is asking for internet permission, Bluetooth permission, read phone state, access Wi-Fi state, access network state, and read Google services. Okay, these are the permissions. So what I did then, I just use some analysis tool which are available and analyze this app. What these tools have to say about the risk factor which is involved with the app. These are the tools that I have used for analyzing the app. Virus Total, Visual Threat, Sandroid, these are web services which are used to analyze Android application. Permission Checker and Permission Friendly are the apps which are available on Google Play Store. These are the web services. Okay, these two are the apps which will analyze the apps. Okay, and these are the research tools. So I have used all the variations which are available for analyzing, and this is the output. So Virus Total is actually a collection of 56 or 57 antiviruses. Okay, so what they will do is, they will just take your app and they will run your app on all the antiviruses, like 56 or 57, whatever they have. They will run it on all the antiviruses, and then the report of all the antiviruses is combined, and then they will give you the output, something like that. Okay, so 1 out of 56 antiviruses says that this is a kind of a virus, or some maliciousness is there. Okay, so it's like that. It is quite low, and because it is a benign app, right, it does not have any malicious intention of this particular app. So Visual Thread and Sandroid are, basically give risk score kind of a thing, depending upon their analysis, whatever they are doing in the background. They will give you the risk score and a few detail, right? So the links that I have shared here are actually the links of the entire report of this particular app. So the risk score is 30 and 28 on the scale of 0 to 100. Permission Checker and Permission Friendly, these are the apps. So the score is 700 on the scale of 0 to 1000, because these two particular tools are much more related with permissions. More the permission, the higher is the score. Okay. And research tools, actually this particular version is not compatible. At the time when I did this particular analysis, the field was quite new and the research tools was just developed. Okay, so they are not compatible with all the versions of the Android applications, and therefore no one can, Droid Safe and Heldroid have version compatibility issues, whereas ICCT and FlowDroid says there is no sync and no source, means it is not leaking any information. Okay, so if the source and sync is there, means information is coming from a source and it is syncing to a particular source, right? So it is also not found. Okay, so after that, what I did is I recompile that, I mean, reverse engineer that app. Okay, break that app and just have a look at what is there inside the app. Okay, and whenever any Android app has been reverse engineered, okay, we get two types of files. One is the manifest file and the other one is the dex file. Dex means all the Java classes are compiled and kept into dex file, and manifest means all the permission related and other information about the app are kept in the manifest file. So what I did, I just remove all the permission from manifest file. Okay, so if you remember, there are six permissions. There are these six permissions. What I did, I see actually the permission required to perform all these operations is just this one. If you have read phone state permission, you can read device info, ID, local IP, MAC address, everything you can do. You don't require any other permission, right? So I just remove these five permissions and just keep one permission, read phone state. Okay. I also added one more permission, and that is write external storage. So now the app has only two permission, read phone state permission, which was previously there, and I have added write external storage because I want the app to write whatever the information read should be written somewhere, maybe in the SD card or somewhere, right? So for that, I included this permission. And I just repack the app and again analyze it. So you understand what I did actually? So first I extracted the app, then I modified the permission set, only the permission set. Third, I inserted this leakage code. Okay, whatever is read should be written in the SD card. And as a fourth step, I repackage the app and again analyze the app into all these tools. Okay, so this is the result. So this is the original app, and this column represent the result of the modified app. Okay, and you can see, you yourself see, although this particular app that I modified has a leakage code in it. It is writing your data somewhere. Okay, but you can see the risk score now, 0 of 56, risk square is 12 instead of 30 and 28. 700, it becomes 300, right? I also make it compatible with other tools. So no sourcing found. Now yes, Droid Safe says that there is a source and there is a sync. Okay, because you are reading the information and writing the information. So yes, Droid Safe generate a red flag. Even this permission checker generate a red flag. Okay, that the app is in permission leakage category. But apart from these two, nobody says that there is a problem. There is one more tool, Heldroid. Okay, so which was there previously. Yeah, so this Heldroid previous version was uncompatible, but this time it says that app is malicious. It is a ML based tool. So there is an entire report, and at the end there is a prediction. Okay, so this also says that the app is malicious. Okay, so out of all these tools, only three tools are now saying that the app is malicious. After that, what I did is I divide this entire app into two apps, right? So if you remember, in the app, modified app, we have two permission, read phone state and write external storage. I made two app out of it, And the first app is having only read phone state permission. So the first app job is just to read the information, pass it to the second app. Okay, now this is I named it as collector because it is just collecting the information. So through intent, the information is sent to collector. This is the IPC mechanism, and collector will write the information to the SD card. Okay, so now there are two apps. Then what I did, I analyzed these two apps on again the same tools, and now you can see the risk score. You can see permission checker not in any category. What is the reason? Can anybody tell me? Droid safe, no sourcing found. Here also it is no sourcing found. Yes, now can you tell me why it is so? Even let me tell you the results of Heldroid. It says app is benign. It says app is benign because there are two apps, right? So both the apps are benign. So now nobody is telling that the app is doing any malicious thing. But still, I am telling you that the app is actually leaking the data. Yes, am I making some sense here? Yes.
Ma'am, but the second app is saving the data, so it should have a sync, no?
Yes, but these tools are much more towards whether the information is leaked or not. So information leakage is there when there is a pair of source and sync. Are you getting my point?
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah. So if we say only source, only sync, it will not have any harm. If somebody is accessing the data, just accessing the data, it is not going out of your device anyways, right? So it is not considered. And as I told you, these are the research tools, so they are much more concerned with leakage of information, right? So they work in pairs. Yeah, so what is the main reason of this? Why these tools are unable to detect it?
They're not taking into account the inter inter app communications.
Interact communication.
Like they're assessing each app individually, and they don't think they're like they're not taking into consideration about how it interacts with other apps.
Right, right. So this is one important point which was missing in all these tools, that they are actually checking one app at a time. They are not taking multiple apps into consideration, and they are not considering communication that is going on between multiple apps. Okay, so they have checked device ID separately, they have checked collector separately. Okay, but the problem is the information is when. Okay, so now another point, do we say that this IPC mechanism is malicious? Can we say that? Can we say that there should not be any communication between apps? How it helps actually, why it is there at the first place? So you might be using few apps, like maybe you can have a Uber app in your mobile and a Google Map app, right? So what Uber will do, Uber will have a IPC with Google Map, and then they can track your location and tell you that where the driver is, where you are, and things like that. Okay, So for that matter, you need IPC mechanism, because otherwise you have to build each and everything inside one app only. Okay, so this is called reusability of of the functionality which is available, right? And therefore it is very much important to have that particular thing in place. Okay, because see, if you start putting everything inside one app, then that app will become very bulky, you know and that app will become too much slow, because you are having a lots and lots of functionality into one app. There are chances of more and more errors into that. Okay, so for that matter, what people are doing is they are start using the code or the apps which are already available. So for example, if you want to open some data into a PDF reader, not all the apps involve put PDF reader into them. We actually use other PDF reader apps which are installed in our mobile phones. Okay, and for that IPC is used. Now if they start considering IPC also, or if they start considering multiple apps, the problem is how you can define that this particular IPC is malicious or leak your information, and this particular IPC is not leaking your information. Can you see the challenge involved here? Yes, we don't have that particular fine line that this IPC is malicious, and this line we have in our security. So when we say confidentiality breach, we know that the confidentiality is breached in that case and confidentiality is not breached in that case. But when we talk about privacy, we don't know whether this is a malicious thing or whether this is a benign, because it happens in both the cases, right? So yes, you are correct. So first thing is correct, that they are not considering multiple apps. What is the second point? What is the second analysis? Yes, Mashu.
Ma'am, we cannot define which IPC communication is dangerous or malicious.
Right. So defining malicious IPC is not, I mean, it is not possible actually. What else? Yes, Mayank. So for example, suppose we have, okay, so the contact information is leaked. For some people, it may be possible that they say that, okay, if this is leaked, we don't have any problem. So sometimes it may happen that, some app is taking your location. One user can say that if somebody is tracking my location, I don't mind. Whereas other person can say that if somebody is tracking my location, I am having a problem. Okay, so in that case also subjectivity comes. Okay, so for some people it is a privacy matters, for some it is not. Okay, and that is why it is quite challenging to define that thin line of privacy well. And it is actually I mean, doesn't matter that we have the security things with us. Okay, but privacy issues are much worse than security. Okay, we have a default setting for security. For example, if you are using a firewall, as we have studied that with a minimal user configuration, people can have a secure system. Okay, you just buy a firewall, you just install it. It has a default setting, and more or less it will be good for you. Maybe you have to tweak with one or two different things that you have to customize according to you. But when we are concerned with privacy issues, default setting, there is nothing like default setting. Okay, whatever you have, it is quite permissive. So if you say that okay, I am not going to use in news app, I'm not going to use it. Why? Because it may leak my data. It may leak my data. But if you are say that I am not using it, it means you don't get that functionality as well, right? You cannot install that app. If you say I will not share my location with anybody, okay, don't share it. But in that case, then you don't have the all the goodness of sharing the location, right? So that is the problem with privacy. You want to share with your location, but you want to share it with only the genuine person. You don't want it to get leaked. You want to maybe have the functionality. So if we say, you know I don't want that Google will see all my, what I'm browsing and my preferences. Okay, go ahead. You can use a browser, which is what you call it as, you know, incognitive mode or something like that. But in that case, if you will not, if you are always using incognitive browser, then sometimes it is quite helpful, when Google suggests something to you and Google, somehow tell you that what, so you want this and that, so it is in that sense helpful also. Okay, so it provide incentives also. So that incentives we are not able to get if you become so stubborn, and that is the problem. Let's say, still if we want to define privacy, so what do you understand by privacy? Now you have to tell me, what is privacy? We have seen some scenario, we have learned a little bit about how the privacy leak has been happened, right? Can you define privacy? Yes, Gurmaninder.
Hello, is I'm audible?
Yes, can you define privacy now?
Privacy is something which we want to control and which we want to keep to ourselves, and which we do not want others to assess it.
Okay, so you
Like
want secrets.
yes, ma'am, like private data or anything like passwords or bank account details,
Mhm.
something about like that, which which I want to keep uh, to me or to my good ones. So that's a private thing, and I don't want to assess others. For that, I have to put security on that. So privacy and security is basically related terms, which without security, privacy cannot be achieved, I guess.
Okay, right, nice explanation. Kishan, Jai Kishan, what do you understand by privacy now?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, privacy is actually protecting our information.
Mhm.
Like, I don't want to compromise with my passwords and data, like just Instagram account.
So you also want to say that it is kind of a secrecy.
Yes,
That
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
okay. All right. Let's see. Let's see what is there in the slide. So basically, you came across this term. I have nothing to hide. Generally, people, especially in India, they say, I have nothing to hide. It doesn't matter. There is nothing in my mobile. Okay. Now youngster will say, okay, they will understand. But previous I mean, maybe 5 years back, if you ask anybody, they will say, see, I have nothing to hide. It doesn't matter. Okay. Even if your parents, you will ask your parents, don't install these apps. They may be a malicious app, they may be a harmful app. They will say it's okay, no issues, we don't have anything in our mobile, right? Not only mobile, in general as well. So if we learn, what we can learn from this statement is exactly what Jai Kishan and Gurmaninder has pointed out, that I have nothing to hide. So somehow we are relating privacy with some sort of secrecy. Okay, hiding something. I want to hide something, and since there is nothing to hide, I mean, we don't care about privacy. Okay, so people are equating privacy with hiding something. Okay, now what? So we can we say that if something is hidden, now if if we say password, okay, so password is hidden or it is not hidden, right? There are only two options, right? If either it is hidden, either it is secret or it is not secret. It is hidden or not hidden. Okay. Now, what do we mean by hidden? Hidden means only you know. Not hidden means somebody else is also knowing. Okay. So, generally, we want to consider privacy as secrecy. So, we will say that if something is secret, it is private. If something is not secret, it is not private. All agree with me? Suppose this is a person. Okay, so we will talk about this particular person. So I think, yeah, this person is having his medical records. Okay, so now the health records are generally considered, whatever health record data set is there, it is considered to be I mean, people want to maintain the privacy of their health records, right? Now, if we go with this definition, privacy as secrecy, we can consider this as a private as long as only we can access these records. Nobody else apart from us can access this record. This is called secrecy. Something is secret. Secret means just I am the person who is knowing it. Nobody else can have the access. Okay. So we consider it to be private as long as we can access it. Now, suppose somebody came, this person came into picture and he tried to access it and the access was denied. So we say, yes, the privacy is maintained because the secrecy is maintained. The information is still private. Another case is one another person came and he get the access of that resources. Now, this is something, a problematic situation because now another person know this information. It is not now a secret information and hence it is not a private information. Can you see this difference actually? So if we consider privacy as secrecy, if your information, your private information is into somebody else's hand, then we can say now this information is not private. Why? Because it is not secret. And as we define privacy, we say if something is private, is secret, it is private. If something is not secret, it is not private. So now, can you tell me, is it true? Is this sentence true? Yes or no?
No, ma'am. If something is secret, then it is private, but the vice versa is not true.
No, if something is secret, it's private. It means that if something is not secret, it is not private. No.
Ma'am, but privacy involves does not mean that no one should know the information. It should mean that only the people we trust should know the information.
That is correct, right? So let's consider another scenario where, so considering privacy as secrecy is very simple to understand, but it is not actually defining the privacy overall. We have to add something extra, right? As you are telling me, even Parkavi is pointing out that we have to bring some good ones to the picture, someone who we want to give control to. Okay, so it is not only about secrecy. It is, I mean, secrecy means just I and nobody else know. This is the definition of secrecy. So we cannot say privacy is secrecy. Okay, and we have seen why. Okay, so can we have another much better definition of privacy? So let's see another example. So we are talking about the same example. Suppose now this is the person, and I will say that the neighbor of this person, okay, came and access and he says that I want to access your medical records. Now what is this? Is this a privacy violation? Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
This is a privacy violation. Why it is a privacy violation? Because there is no reason why the neighbor want to access the health records. Okay. If I add one more thing into this, that the neighbor is his doctor. Now, can you say that this is a privacy violation?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am. So what is changing actually? Now you will say, it makes sense to share the information with the neighbor. Okay, because he is the doctor also. So now there is no privacy. So can you see the subtlety that the same action, previously you are saying this is the privacy violation. The same neighbor is there, the same person is there, and the neighbor want to access the health record. But in one case you are saying this is privacy violation, and in the other case you are saying that it is not a privacy violation. Why? What is added? What is added into this? It is the context. Okay, so as soon as I say that the neighbor is the doctor, now it is making sense to share the medical information with a doctor, right? So whenever we want to define the privacy, we have to see the context also. And from the beginning of the lecture, I'm saying, repeating the same thing, that for some people it may be a privacy violation, for other people it is not a privacy violation. The same situation could be a privacy violation in some cases, and in other cases it is not. Okay, so therefore it is very hard to define the privacy because it involves context. So what we can say is, now if want to redefine it, we can say that privacy involves context as well. Privacy alone we cannot define, but you just give me the context, then I will tell you that whether the privacy violation is there or it is not there. Okay, so there are four important things that we have to consider in this context. Okay, first of all, what is the data? What is the data that is being transmitted, right? So in our example, it is our medical records. It could be anything. Okay, so first we have to consider what is the data. Okay, and this should be taken into consideration when you are making a decision whether privacy is violated or not. Suppose if somebody came to somebody's house and he want to access a cup of sugar, is it a privacy violation? Yes or no?
No, ma'am. No information is
No,
there.
ma'am.
No, even if they are asking for the address or maybe the phone number. Okay, so it makes sense that the neighbor should have our phone number in case of emergency or something. So data is also important. But if somebody came and asking our pin, it then it is a privacy violation. So what is the data that we need to take into consideration while taking the decision? Second thing is, who is the data going to? Who is the receiver of the data? That is also important. So in the previous example, if the neighbor came and asked for the medical records, it is not making any sense, it is a privacy violation. But if the doctor came and asking for their data, then it is not a privacy violation. So who is the data going to is also an important thing to take into consideration while deciding whether privacy violation is there or not. Okay, so this is called the context. What is the correct context? What is the data? Who is the data going to? How did they receive it? Now this is also very, very, very important, whether the data is received with consent of the user or so. Okay, so let me take the same example, the previous example. Now suppose the neighbor, he is the doctor, he broke into the house and accessed the medical records. Now is this a privacy violation?
Yes.
Why?
Yes.
Why it is a privacy violation?
because the doctor doesn't ask for the consent of the neighbor. He is just directly going to his home.
Right, right. So how did the data received is also very important to decide whether privacy violation is there and or not. Okay. And the fourth point is what will they do with that data? Now, so let's take the same example. So if I am giving my medical record to a doctor, what I am expecting that the doctor will use this information to treat me, right? And this is what I want. I mean, this is why I want to give my medical records to a doctor. Suppose the doctor go to maybe some insurance company, and then he ask that these are the medical records of this these are the medical records of the person, and according to this the insurance company can lower or raise the premium and things like that. Now, is this a violation? Is this a privacy violation?
Yes, ma'am, because the doctor didn't ask us if he can share the information with anyone else.
Right. So the important thing is what the receiver will do with that information will also take into consideration, because I am giving the information for this purpose. If you are misusing that data, then also it is a problem. Okay, I am not expecting the doctor to go to the insurance company and ask for raising or lowering down my premium. Okay, so now I hope you understand why privacy is a complex thing. It is not just a simple definition in which we can define that this is so. If you remember security, we have defined it very well, right? We said that security means the information system has to achieve certain goals, and these are the maybe 10 goals that a security system or any information system would like to achieve. But we cannot do it here, because this is not a binary thing that it is breached or not breached. We have to take all these things into consideration. Okay, and that there are few things that we have to take into consideration while defining the privacy, right? What are those points? Everybody, even all books that are there, people say that data transmission occurs in society, right? I mean, it will not be like that data will not transmit from one place to another, right? So hence we cannot define that privacy is secrecy, because data needs to be transferred. Okay, except even if it is your pin, I mean, there is one person or one system who will generate the pin, and that pin will be transmitted to you. So data transmission always occur, and you have to do that, right? But there is an observation, very important observation. So with this, what I want to say is data transmission occur in society, and therefore we cannot define privacy as secrecy. Okay, secrecy is nothing in case of privacy. We have to transmit the data. But what has been observed is this: data transmission occur in a particular domain of our life. So in each data transmission, there is associated a domain of the life. Okay, now what do I mean by this? So for example, we have taken the example of our medical data. Okay, so what I want is my medical data will be circulated or will be transmitted only to the medical domain of my life. Are you getting my point? Maybe doctors, maybe my dietitian, maybe the insurance company, maybe anybody who is concerned, very much concerned about my health. So that will form the medical domain of my life. And what I want is that my medical records will be transmitted only to the medical domain of my life, right? So for example, you all are the students, and you all are also associated with me, right? But what is the relation that we are having? Maybe we are having a academic relationship, right? So what I want is, so if I prepare slides, if I prepare video lectures, so those things will be circulated in the educational domain of my life, Are you getting my point? You don't want to access my medical records anyways, right? So for each particular data, there is a domain associated with it. Okay. So another domain, we can consider it as an educational domain. What you want or what I want is, if a video lecture of mine giving this particular, some online class or something like that, if that will be sent, it is okay to the students, right? But suppose if there is a video of me cooking the breakfast and that will be circulated among the students, so that is considered to be a privacy violation. Am I making sense here? Say that data transmission should be allowed or disallowed based on a CI tuple. Okay, now what is CI? This is contextual integrity tuple. Okay, contextual integrity. We want to maintain contextual integrity. Okay, so tuple has the information about each data transmission. So let's see. It consists of actors. So one of the element is actor, which consists of three things: sender, receiver, and subject. Okay, sender means who is sending the data, the receiver means who is receiving the data, and subject is who is the subject of the data, about whom we are talking. What is the subject of the data? So generally sender and subject both are same. If I'm sharing some information, it is related to me, right? So we will see this, but it may be same or it may be different. I can share some information which is not about me, which is about some other individual or something like that, right? So these are the three things which comes into actor. So these are the three actors in our privacy definition: sender, receiver, and the subject of the data. So second element is information type. What is the information that has been sent, right? Okay, so what information I am giving? For example, in the previous example, my medical records is the information which I want to give. So basically, information type defines what is the domain of the data. Okay, if it is a lecture video, then it belongs to educational domain. If it is a financial detail, it belongs to my financial domain, things like that. Third thing is transmission principle, right? So how the data is transferred, that is also important, whether it is with the consent of the sender or whether it is through a written permission or whatever, right? So how the data is transmitted is also very important. So for example, if a police broke into your house, then it is illegal. But if they have proper warrant with permission, okay, then they are allowed to do so, right? So privacy changes, as we have already seen, that how the data transmission is done, according to that also the violation of the privacy decision changes or depends actually, right? So overall, the CI tuple consists of three elements: actors, information type, and transmission principle. In actors, there are total three actors: sender, receiver, and subject of the data, right? So this is somehow, we can say that this is the best possible definition that we can give to privacy. If you will give me all this information, based on that, I will take the decision that whether privacy is violated or not. And this is known as contextual integrity. Privacy can be seen as contextual integrity. Okay, any question in this? So it is somehow, the common, or you can say the standard practices that are validated by the society, right? So it can be, yes, you are very correct in that sense. So according to, contextual integrity, there are some societal norms. Now these norms are the rules or expectation that either exist in law or expected social conduct, right? As mentioned by you. So there is something which is very common and well accepted by everyone. Okay, so this is social conduct, but it also have some sort of law. So maybe there is some law exist for something, and according to that law, norms or rules are defined. Okay, whether this CI tuple is accepted or not accepted. So, for example, there is a law called HIPAA. So, HIPAA law, this particular law was created to provide protection to our personal health information, right? So the full form is something like that only, Personal Health Information Act, right? Something like that. So there is a law, HIPAA, and according to which, if the data or based on that, the CI tuple, if it has something which is violating this law, then we can say the privacy is violated. Similarly, there is a law, OPA, which is for, Children Online Protection Act, which is also a new law which is introduced, recently introduced. So they take care of all the online protection of children, for example, leaking of the images, etc., etc. Okay, so these two are the example of norms which exist in law, and there are many such examples. Other kind of norms could be, expected social conduct. So if I say some private information to a person and ask him that please don't tell this particular information to anyone, right? If he go and tell that information, now this is something we were not expecting from him. Okay, and so he is not actually violating any law, but he is not doing as expected by social conduct. Okay, so depending upon these two things, again, violation, definition of violation changes, right? And you can see because of this, okay, law is okay, right? So see, law also changes country to country. There are different laws for each and everything, right? Similarly, even in one country, there are different many cultures, specifically in India, right? So there are different social conduct in each and every state, right? So, this is the reason why privacy is so challenging, right? It is very, very subjective. It depends upon a lots and lots of things. Okay. So, yeah, but somehow the acceptability of a CI tuple can be based on some norms. And since we want to introduce that subjectivity, we can say that if it exists in the law where it happens, or it is expected social conduct where it happens. Okay, right. So we can say that norms are like mandatory access control, where system is the society. So in mandatory access control, what happened? So if you remember your OS course, there is discretionary access control and mandatory access control, right? In mandatory access control, the access control remains with the system, and then system has some list according, or rules, policies according to which the system define whether a person can access a resource or not, a process can access the object or not. Okay, whereas in DAC, this particular list is given to each and every object, right? So each file is having their own, their own access control rights, that who can access this file and who cannot access that file. Whereas in mandatory access control, it is the operating system who will take care of each and everything. So somehow norms are like mandatory access control, where the controller is the society where we are living. Okay, it could be a country, it could be a particular culture, or it could be a society in general. Okay, now in this, if a person who is defining the acceptability is the subject of the data, then it is like discretionary access control. Okay, it may be possible that if it is your medical records, you can define the rules that, okay, this particular doctor can access my records. That's it. If I am going to a new doctor, then the old doctor cannot share the records with my new doctor. Something like that, right? So when the rules are defined by an individual, that what I will accept or not. So if you remember, I gave you an example. Somebody wants that, okay, my picture, I would like to make it public. Some says, I don't want to make it public. I want to share it with no one. Some says that I want to share only with my friends. Some says I want to share it with my friends as well as friends of friends. Okay. So depending upon individual's acceptability, the rule changes, and that is known as discretionary access control. Am I making sense here? Yes? No?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So can anybody repeat what you understand actually? Yes, I will just wait for a few minutes because see, these are very subtle points. Maybe it seems very simple to you right now, but you have to understand this very well. So can anybody repeat? Yes, I cannot recall much names, but I think Mashu is there, Mayank is there, Gurmaninder is there, Sonali is there. Who else? Who else is attending the class?
Yes, ma'am. Rishabh.
Rishabh, yeah. So Rishabh, you tell me.
Yes, ma'am. In this, the privacy is different for different person. An individual can define its privacy boundaries. Like if you want to share with. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, carry on.
Yes, ma'am. Individual can decide its individual boundary whether he want to share with a person or not, and it depends on the subject of data, and that's all, ma'am.
Right. So see, the main point is, so what we are trying to do is somehow we are defining formally what do we mean by privacy. And we came to a conclusion that if we want to define a tuple, right, we can define the privacy as contextual integrity and we call it a CI tuple. Okay, so this is a CI tuple which contain actor, information type, and transmission principle, where actors consist of sender, receiver, and subject, right? Now, who define the acceptability? So we are talking about now. See, based on what we will say that this CI tuple is valid, not violating any privacy, and this is not a valid or violating a privacy. How can we say that? So we came to a conclusion that yes, there are some norms which can define such things. Okay, along with the norms. So norms is the one thing, but if we follow the norms, so whenever we are following the norm, it is a mandatory access control kind of a thing. See, whenever we have to define something formally, we have to relate it with something which is well understood. So MAC, DAC, these access controls are well understood now, right? Okay, so norms are like mandatory access control, whereas if there is a person himself who is defining that how my data flows, okay, then it is called discretionary access control, right? So if you remember DAC, each file has its own permission, right? So read, write, execute, owner can read, write, execute, maybe other can only read and execute, and guest can only read, something like that, right? So each object is having that permission. Similarly, each person is defining how my data flows, where my data goes, etc. So this is like discretionary access control. Okay. Now it's the individual choice that define where my data can go. It is like data autonomy. This is called data autonomy. When an individual define, it is called data autonomy because the data is, you know, the person has the autonomy to that particular data. Okay, and he is taking all the decisions, right? So now let me relate this information flow control that we have seen, DAC and MAC, with contextual integrity. Okay, so in a CI tuple we have these three things. Now the question is, how do we enforce contextual integrity? Like, how can I make sure that suppose my doctor, okay, so I am giving the information to my doctor, which is a valid CI tuple. how can I make sure that the doctor is not using that information into a wrong context? Are you getting my point? How can I enforce contextual integrity? See, one option is whenever I give my information to the doctor, I will start following the doctor forever. Okay, and I keep on checking that is he sending that data to somebody, in a wrong context, or I will keep on recording each and everything what he says, that whether he is leaking my information or not, etc., etc. So is it practically possible? Yes or no? Is it possible?
No, ma'am.
No, we cannot. So if I give a data right now, I will say, okay, it is a valid CI tuple. But how can I make sure that it will remain, intact? This contextual integrity remain intact forever. How can I do that? Now, this is another challenge. Please keep in mind, this is another challenge, and that is also a very, big challenge. Although we have a striking resemblance with information flow, we cannot use the techniques which we are using there. We see that it is like MAC and DAC, and we have a proper access control mechanism in place, right? We have many examples where we are actually doing it very perfectly. But how to do it in case of privacy? So instead, in spite of a striking resemblance with the information flow control, it is very difficult for us to enforce it. Okay, we cannot enforce privacy, right? So for example, so if I give, yes, this is what it is written here also. Okay, right. So now what to do? How can I make sure that the doctor will not use the information in a wrong context? Right, so we need something, actually we need something extra. We defined privacy, we defined acceptability of the CI tuple. Okay, so we defined privacy in the form of CI tuple, then we defined acceptability of the CI tuple. Now we need to somehow come up with some technique or technology or something like that which can enforce this acceptability forever. Okay, so it is kind of a marriage of policy and technology. We build the policy, but now we need a technology to implement this policy. Okay, so now let's see what we can do. Okay, so let me give you now another example. What is a privacy problem actually? Okay, and this will tell you another challenge which is involved, right? So suppose I am having a COVID-19 India data set. Okay, so this is a data set which has the information about all those people who have gone through COVID disease, basically. Okay, so definitely it will contain some personal information also, right? Their address, their phone numbers, their age, their gender, lots of personal information is there in the data set. Now what we want is, there is a group of people who want to do some sort of a research on this particular data set, right? But what we need to make sure that even if I will, so see, for the research purpose, I have to share the data set. Otherwise, how it will be possible if I will not share the database, right? So data sharing is actually very, very required thing. But at the same time, what we need to maintain is, we need to maintain that even if I will give this particular data to the research community, privacy of any individual should not be violated. Are you getting my point? Yes. Somehow I have to make sure that privacy violation should not be there. Okay, so researchers want to learn something from this, right? But suppose there is one researcher who is not very much interested in analyzing the real problem. He is suppose interested in knowing about a particular actor, right? Say Amitabh Bachchan. What he want is, he just want to know the record of the Amitabh Bachchan. He has gone through COVID, and there is a personal data of him, stored in the data set. Now, this malicious researcher, we can say, just want to know about a particular actor. He will look up the data set, gain the information for that actor, and use that data into, he can actually misuse that data. Okay, and same happens with anybody else as well. So this is the problem. Now, how to deal with the problem? Yes, now you have to tell me. You have to think actually what we can do. But there are not many things that we have to keep, but just focus on these 6 things, let's say, right? So there are in total 6 personal information, suppose, right? And out of that, we have removed 3 information. Now we just have a gender, age, and a zip code, right? So let's see. So can we uniquely define a person? I mean, okay, so let's see, right? Anything anybody want to say? Okay. So basically what you are giving, what the solution that you are proposing is known as de-identification of data. Okay. What we are trying to do here is we are removing any identifiable information from the data set. For example, if I give you all these 6 information, you can identify a person individually, right? Now, what we are trying to do to maintain privacy is we are removing identifiable information. Okay, and maybe what we can do, we can replace it with some random value. So name could be any random name we can place just to add some noise in the data set, right? And then we will release the data set in the hope that the original data cannot be reconstructed. Agreed? This is what we are doing. Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So now the problem is previously, people are using this de-identification for this purpose. Okay. So they are removing name, addresses, and things like that. And this is known as, specifically, technical term is k-anonymity. K-anonymity. Okay. So K is a number of, columns or number of fields that you have removed to create the anonymization. Okay. And then based on this K, so for now we have removed 3 things from our data set. So this is K anonymity. So this K actually represent or maybe used to measure the hardness of the data in which it can be reconstructed. Okay. So suppose if I only remove name, otherwise rest everything will be same. It is quite easy to identify the name of the person giving all the rest of the information, right? It is possible, right? Yes. So as I increase number of fields that are removed, but at the same time, I have to make the data sensible also, useful also, right? So this is known as k-anonymity. So one of the students, I will give this paper which is related to k-anonymity. Okay, so there you have to use this concept. Okay. Right. Now let me tell you one very good case. Right, and I will show you that why this de-identification actually does not work. Okay, so it turns out that if you take the intersection of 2 data sets, you can re-identify most of the people. And this work is, so there is a paper, re-identification. Okay, this is by Latanya Sweeney in Harvard University. And you will get this particular, this link, you will get the paper and all the findings by this particular professor. What she said is, am I audible? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
You are
ma'am.
audible.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So what she said is, around 87% of the Americans can be identified by only these 3 information. So if you can recall, the COVID data set that we have discussed just now, we actually kept these 3 information, right? We need to know the age, and age is nothing but the birth date. We need to know the gender, we need to know the zip code. And if we have these 3 information, what we can do is we can take intersection of 2 different data sets which are available, right? So first let me tell you what particular this case is all about. So she has used the medical data, which is de-identified, right? So if you see, there is no name, there is no address, nothing. The only thing is when the person visit the hospital, the ethnicity of the person, whatever diagnosis, procedure, medication, total charges, etc. Along with that, the age, zip code or postcode, or and the gender. These three information are there. So if you only see this data set, can you identify a person individually? Yes, no?
I don't think so.
Right. So this is known as de-identified data set, right? We already did de-identification on this data set in order to publish this particular, data set to the researchers for further research. Okay. Now what this lady did was, she take another data set, which is a voter data set, which is also available, right? So even if you go and search, there is all those details of your PAN cards and things like that over the internet, right? Even Aadhaar card details, etc., is also there. So there are lots and lots of data set which is out there, okay, in the public domain. So what she did, she take this voter database which have name of the person, age, postcode, gender of the person, address of the person, and his political affiliation, right? So this is another data set. So I already it is drawn with yellow color, and she do kind of an intersection. Now the intersection, these are the three common fields which she have, okay, and she have shown the result that if you take intersection of these two data sets, you can able to identify most of the people, okay. And this is not just the assumptions, she actually did the research and the data is out there, okay. And with this she have revealed the information about a very famous political leader there, okay. So for that matter, there are lots and lots of data sets which are available online, and so this is the intersection of only two data sets. If you take multiple data sets, you get multiple intersection points, and then you can get or re-identify the people, reconstruct the data very easily, right? And according to that particular paper, you can see that around 87% of the Americans can be identified, right? So is it worth using the identification method? Yes, no? So let me give you one more example, okay? And this is quite recent example where, I mean, not recent now, but yes, maybe a decade before. So there was a Netflix competition which was out there, and the competition was to develop an algorithm to predict how someone will rate a movie, okay. So they want to develop a prediction algorithm that given the data, you have to develop an algorithm that how this person will going to rate a particular movie, okay. So in that competition, what the Netflix did is Netflix outsourced a data set for the competition, and that data set consists of username, movie, and rating. Obviously, privacy has to be maintained, right? So username was randomized, okay. No proper username was given, but yes, the movie was proper, and their rating, corresponding rating was proper, okay. So there are 100 million ratings, 480,000 users, and 17,000 movies. So this huge data set is released by Netflix so that people can use it during the competition. Now what happened? There is a paper which is robust de-anonymization of LastPass data set, which is the authors are from University of Texas. What they did, they again perform a linkage attack. So this data set is given by Netflix. Now there is another portal, IMDb, which is also doing similar thing, right? And the data set of IMDb is out there. So what they did is they combined these two data sets. Okay, so the intersection of these two data set actually revealed all the usernames. Okay, so since the usernames are randomized, they in the paper they published the entire data set along with the valid username, their actual username, and hence the privacy violation is there. Okay, so if not this, then what? Okay, so what we want is something stronger than this. We don't want simple de-anonymization or de-identification. We want something stronger than this, right? So what we want? We want that if suppose I will give you two adjacent data set. Okay, now what do I mean by adjacent data set? So if there are two data sets that differ only by one row, okay, rest everything is same, they differ only by one row. So maybe, I don't know, I will draw it with green maybe. So something is missing. Okay, so here is like this and this. So one row is different. So I mean, one person is in dataset 1 and he is not in dataset 2. Only one person. There is a difference of only one person. So if two adjacent dataset is given, you are not able to identify that one differing member. Are you getting my point? This is something what we want. This is quite strong, right? I am saying you that I am giving you two data sets and only one person is different. Only one row is different in these two data sets. Still, you are not able to identify that unique person. This is what we want. Okay. And this is called differential privacy. Okay. It is a method which will provide us the utility as well as the privacy. Agreed or not? This is our goal actually, right? Yes, if we can achieve this, do you think it is good? Yes? Is it possible?
No idea.
No idea. Okay, let's see. Right. So basically, differential privacy says, don't give the exact answer to the query, but a noisy one, right? So let me give you an example. Suppose there is a survey, and the survey says that how many people pick their nose. Okay, now this is something which is a weird question, right? Nobody would like to reveal in public that whether the person is picked their nose or not, right? But suppose we want to conduct the survey. Okay, how can we give the question, do you pick your nose? Answer is yes or no. Okay, now we will collect the survey on our server, but before sending it to the server, we will insert some noise. This is what differential privacy is. We will add some noise, some randomness in it. Now, how can we do that? So see, this is a simple, very simple example. Okay. So what we will collect, what we will do, we will collect the survey on the server, but before sending it to the server, we will flip a coin. Okay, before sending it to the server, we will flip a coin. I mean, we have to bring probability in picture. Now, if we get head, we will put real answer of the Bob in the database. Okay, so the question is whether Bob picked his nose. He either answered yes or answered no. But before saving his actual answer to the server, we will flip a coin. If it is a head, we will store its real answer. If it is a tail, we will flip the coin again. Again, if we get a tail, we will store yes, no matter what Bob answered. If it is a head, we will store no, no matter what Bob answered. Okay, now in the database, what is the probability that the actual answer given by the Bob is stored? Tell me. Yes? What is
75%?
Exactly. So 75% are the chances that the actual answer given by the Bob is stored, right? Because 50% chances that we store Bob's real information, and So these are 25% chances, either we'll store no or yes. Even if whatever we store doesn't matter, Bob has answered either yes or no anyways, right? So we are adding 25% of the noise in the data set. Okay, so what we are achieving from this? Because of this noise, we cannot trust individual answer, right? So if in the database it is written Bob answered yes, we don't know that whether it is the right answer given by the Bob or not. So you are not sure about people answer. So you cannot judge them based on their answers, right? And this is very useful when we are collecting some illegal behavior of the person, whether they are taking drugs or not, whether we want them to participate in the survey, but at the same time we are saying that we will not reveal your identity. We will maintain your privacy. Okay, so how to do that? So this is what differential privacy is for. Now you may say that, ma'am, since we are adding the noise, do you think that the research that will be derived out of this is it will give you the actual picture of what is going on? So to that my answer is, see, we know how much noise we have added. We know the distribution of noise, right? So what people do is, in differential privacy, when they come up to the result, they know the distribution of the noise. So they can compensate it, and end up with a fairly accurate view of the things. Are you getting my point? Yes? Yes, no?
So, ma'am, even after 25% noise, we are able to get an accurate result.
Accurate result, that's true. And similar, so we are getting the utility, right? At the same time, we are maintaining the privacy also. Because if somebody can, do some attack or can reveal that, okay, Bob answered yes, again, you cannot judge him because you don't know whether the right answer was stored in the database or wrong answer was stored in the dataset. Okay, and this I am talking about the answer like only yes or no. There could be multiple. So this is a simple example I'm giving you. Okay, so this is called Laplace distribution. So the distribution of noise, you can increase it with multiple things. Okay. And the more the noise is, the more data anonymity you can maintain. Okay. So are you getting an idea that how it works? Definitely it is a complex thing, no doubt in that. But are you getting a little bit idea that how it is working? Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Okay, so now let's move forward. So this is called Laplace distribution. And let me tell you, like, Laplace distribution allows us to spread the data over larger ranges. Okay, so right now we only have yes or no as our answers. We can increase it. Okay, and more the range, more data anonymity is there. Okay, because the probability accordingly distributed. So, so there is a paper, the Algorithmic Foundation of Differential Privacy. In this paper, the authors of this paper prove that the results of the survey will be stated same, whether or not you will participate in it. Okay, so therefore there is no reason to not to participate in it. Okay, so they have proved if the right answers were stored, the result is same, and if this particular distribution has been included, differential privacy has been included, then also the results are same. So we can say to a person that whether you will participate in this survey or not, it doesn't affect our result much. Okay, because we are somehow maintaining your privacy. Right? So this is one method. Differential privacy is one method which can be used to maintain the anonymity, at the same time maintaining the utility. Okay, there are few other methods, so let me give you a brief description of those methods. So these are 4 other methods. Encryption is one of the method where we can encrypt the data. Okay, and But yes, again, this is a little bit tricky in that sense that at the destination, definitely you have to decrypt the data. Okay, so even if I am outsourcing a data set, I will encrypt the data set, but the researchers who are actually using the data set, they have to get the decrypted form of the data set, right? So encryption is one method, but people have did some research and they come up with another type of encryption which is called homomorphic encryption, which can be used very much. So what do you mean by homomorphic encryption? So it is a form of encryption that permit user to perform computation on its encrypted data without decrypting it. Okay, so what I am saying is, I will give you a data set. I am giving the data set maybe to a server, and that particular server, I want the server to perform some operation on my data set, but I have encrypted the data set. Now, homomorphic encryption says that the server can perform the operation on the encrypted data set, and I will get the same results what is desired. Okay, so let me give you a simple example of this. Suppose there is some mathematical operation. Okay, so some mathematical operation on the ciphertext, it is equivalent to some other mathematical operation on the plain text. So let's take a concrete example. Suppose multiplication of all the rows of ciphertext. Okay, so cipher, I'm multiplying cipher. If I multiply all the rows of ciphertext, it is suppose equivalent to if I add all the rows of plain text. Both are equivalent. Okay, suppose, right? Now what I will do, I will encrypt my, so I want the addition of all the rows of my plain text, but I don't want to reveal the thing, right? So I don't want to reveal the information. So what I will do is I will encrypt my plain text and convert it into the ciphertext and give it to the server. Now what server will do, since I am using homomorphic encryption, server will not ask me to decrypt the data. Server will perform multiplication on the ciphertext and give me the result. And this is what I want. Okay. So homomorphic encryption is that permit user to perform computation on its encrypted data without first decrypting it. Okay. So this allows data to be encrypted and outsourced to the commercial cloud environment for processing or while encrypted. Are you getting my point? Am I making sense here? Yes.
Ma'am, can you explain again?
Okay, let me explain again. So first, let me explain what do I mean by homomorphic encryption. Okay, so homomorphic encryption says that there are some mathematical operation which exist for the ciphertext, and the result of that mathematical operation is equivalent to some other mathematical operation on the plain text of the ciphertext. Okay, so suppose I am having a message M and the ciphertext of this message is C. Okay, now what I am saying is, suppose, simple example I am taking, if I multiply the particular message or add, for example, addition of all the rows of the plain text message is equivalent to multiplication of all the rows of ciphertext. Both are equivalent operation. To this part, is it clear? This is homomorphic encryption. I'm encrypting it in such a way, particular mathematical operation on the plain text is equivalent to some other mathematical operation on the ciphertext. Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now what I will do is, as a client, suppose I am using, so this is a client and I am using some cloud service. Okay. I don't want to, so this is a huge computational thing that I have to do. So I will outsource it to some cloud service. So I will send the ciphertext to the cloud service. Okay. And what I want him to perform add operation. I need add of M. I need this. Okay. I send him the ciphertext. What he will do, he will multiply all the rows of ciphertext. Since the result of both are same, he will send me the result of multiplication of all the rows of the ciphertext. Is it okay? Making sense?
Yes, ma'am.
I will get what I want, and there is no need for the cloud to decrypt my data also. So I have maintained the privacy of my, so all these are the research topics. Okay, the research is still going on. As I told you again and again, that privacy is a evolving thing which is there. Okay, so one direction is differential privacy and things like that. Another people are working that whether the cryptographic tools that we have used for security can we apply it for privacy, and homomorphic encryption is one of that form. Okay. Yes, any question in this? Yes, any question in homomorphic encryption? No? Okay, fine. So another method that people use could be, or the research is going on, is multi-party computation. Now see, this is again a subfield of cryptography, and the goal is to create a method for the parties to jointly compute a function over their input while keeping those input private. Okay, so suppose there are 4 entities which are involved. Okay, what they will do is they want to create a method jointly to compute a function over their inputs without revealing their inputs, which is very private. Okay, so this is having some input, this is having some input, this is having some input, this is having some input. Can we do multi-party computation? So if you remember Diffie-Hellman method we have seen, right, in which A will select a generator G, and then he will select N, and he perform G to the power X mod N and send this information, the entire thing, to B. Okay, now the job of B is along, so B knows G and N, this is known, public key of A, right, this is known. But what happen is they have to use a secret key. Okay, so how to generate a secret key? Can A share the secret key without actually sharing the secret key over the public network? So how can they do is, this particular information has been sent. Okay, and once he send this particular information, what B will do, B will choose a Y. Okay, and then he will compute G to the power X mod N, which is coming from A. He will take power of Y, so it becomes G to the power XY mod N. Okay, and this particular thing is shared again. Now Y is shared to A, and what A will do, A can also compute the same thing. Okay, so A will compute G to the power XY mod N, and hence there is a secret key which is shared between the two without actually sharing the key over the internet. So something like that. Okay, so there are multiple parties involved in this group. They all have some input, but they don't want to share their input with each other. Without sharing their input, can they have jointly come up with a function which represent their inputs? Okay, so again, this is an evolving field, and lots of research is still going on in this field. Another area is zero knowledge proof. In zero knowledge proof, the method involves, that is it possible that a party can prove something to another party that they know a value X without conveying any information apart from the fact that they know the value X. Okay, so for example, there are 2 parties. One is the prover who needs to prove, and the other one is the verifier. Now, what zero knowledge proof says, can we prove something without having no knowledge about it or without revealing no knowledge about it? Okay, this is called zero knowledge proof. So suppose the prover knows the value of X. He has to prove to the verifier that he knows the value of X. without actually telling him the value of X. Method by which one party, that is the prover, can prove to another party that they know a value X without conveying any other information apart from the fact that they know the value X, right? So for example, suppose there is a lock and I have a key. Somebody asks whether you have the key or not. Without giving the key, I have to prove that I have the key. I should not give him the key, but still I have to prove. So maybe what I can do, a simple example could be, I will open the lock and show him the opened lock. And this will prove that yes, I am the owner or I have the key without actually revealing the key, something like that.